Channel once more. This is Max Easy Lessons. This lesson is going to be on brief analysis, yes, of the short story To Dadu in Memoriam by Paule Marshall. Now, remember, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for stopping in. Don't forget to hit that red button, that subscribe button, so that you will be aware of whatever else is coming. If you're returning to the channel, thank you so much for staying on here, and I do hope that this one will also help you. So let's get straight into it. To Dadu in Memoriam by Paule Marshall. Now, in this story, it's about family in many ways, yes. And the focus here is on the rivalry between the grandmother and the granddaughter. The conflict that exists in this story is based on different opposing forces. Now, one of such we see is the differences between the urban world and the rural world. The conflict between what is modern and what is old, the tradition. And of course, there is that conflict between those who are young and those who are older, where age versus youth comes into place. We also see where Paule Marshall brings to us the different elements that occurs within a family over time. The whole process of generational gap and how one understands what has passed and what is currently happening at this point. There are themes in the short story that you must be aware of. There is a connection, there is confidence, there is change, there is acceptance, there is pride, and there is also conflict. Of course, your teachers may tell you other themes that are there. Nothing is wrong with exploring every single theme that you can, because when you do explore this, you will get a clearer understanding of what is happening in this short story. Now, first up, we understand that the story is narrated from the first person's perspective. We get a female character, a female narrator, but she's not named. And so we can assume then that the story is from memory. And after we have read it, we realize that in many ways, Marshall is exploring the whole idea of conflict and the differences in how people think and respond to what is happening around them. Now, in addition to this, we also understand that the narrator and Dadu are from separate worlds, are living right now within separate spheres, separate worlds, and so they will contrast with each other. The whole idea of what is urban and what is rural. We understand too that the narrator comes from the urban area, New York, and Dadu is from Barbados, the rural area. And so we realize that although both the narrator's world and Dadu's world are different and that they are in conflict with each other, we understand that both of them are trying to put forward their worlds and show us which one is better or which one has more opportunities, whatever it is. But there is that conflict and that competition where we understand that both the narrator and Dadu are trying to see the best of each other's world, of each person's world. Now, what we must note is that we see that Dadu thinks that the narrator may be lying about New York because in many ways, being in a rural setting, she doesn't understand what happens in the urban setting. And so we get the feeling as we read, as the reading progresses of this short story, we get the feeling that Dadu does not believe what the narrator is saying. Now, while Dadu cannot imagine what New York is like, we understand too that it all comes as a shock to her because being in Barbados, she has nothing to compare New York to. She cannot make that comparison, and so it becomes unreal for her in so many ways. If anything, we understand that the narrator is trying to give Dadu a broader perspective of what happens in the wider world. Now, this is ironic in many ways because we realize that the narrator is younger than Dadu. And the irony comes here in terms of the older generation should have been able to teach the younger generation what needs to be learned. But what we realize, though, is that it's the opposite, the reverse. And it's the younger generation who attempts to teach Dadu about what is happening around her. No, some people may say that this is not so. But the bottom line is that we see two different persons from two different worlds attempting to show the other what is going on in the different world. Both characters, they learn something from each other. And even though the narrator does not realize this, towards the end of the story, we can appreciate the fact that the narrator realizes that Dadu did have something to teach as well. Now, it is also important It is also important that Marshall puts Dadu and the narrator together so that they may be able to explore each other's world and at the same time bringing across the theme of connection. Dadu, of course, is the oldest person in her family, and of course, the narrator is the youngest. So, right then and there, we understand that there is a margin that exists between both of them. And when Marshall places the narrator and Dadu together, we understand that the whole idea is to make a connection between the generations, that big generation gap that is there. Marshall is trying to bring across to us the fact that there can be a connection between one generation and the other, and that there can be a connection between the urban world and the rural world. Now, despite all of this, we do realize, though, that there is a connection in many ways, even though Dadu does not understand what life is like for the narrator who lives in New York. One of the things we can also notice is that both Dadu and the narrator have strong self-confidence. Each of these characters are confident in their own way, in what they believe, in what they have experienced. Yes, there is that level of confidence there. And this is important because it helps to strengthen the conflict that we see existing between both characters. Neither of the character is willing to give up on her view. And so we realize that this person has to be strong. And at the same time, the conflict intensifies because each person holds her own story. Now, what is also noticeable is that Dadu looks at the narrator to see if she is lying when she talks about the urban world, New York. But what we do get from this, with all the self-confidence, with all the conflict that exists, with all the whole idea of the generational gap, we understand that each of these characters, both Dadu and the narrator, we realize that they are proud of where they are from. Dadu in particular holds on to that pride of being a Caribbean, West Indian woman. And to her, because she knows nothing else, perhaps, but to her, she understands that Barbados is the best. She doesn't want to even think about a life outside of Barbados. And what we can see too is that Dadu regrets the whole idea of the changes that have come through machinery, through technology, and all of that. She regrets all of this because at that point in her life, being the older in the generation, the oldest in the generation, she is going to understand, without even wanting to, she will understand that it is the machinery, it is the technology that has changed everything that she knew from the past. And one of the things we have to understand is that age does that to people in many ways. You are accustomed to one way of life, and when you hear of something else, it is harder to accept the changes that have come. And all of these changes for Dadu, in her mind, all of these changes that are going to come to Barbados, that are going to change her world, these changes that will change her world, are the result of new technology. And so perhaps she doesn't want to accept it in many ways, and therefore it heightens the conflict in many ways, because what we see is that she cannot accept what the narrator is saying about the changes that have happened in New York. And within herself, Dadu knows that these changes will be coming to Barbados as well. Now, we can also assume that the writer, Paule Marshall, is suggesting that on a social level, Dadu and the narrator are different. And yes, they are different because they are from different worlds in many ways, but the culture that they share, the African culture of the West Indies that they share, comes right back into place. And even though they are disconnected in many ways, they are still connected. No, the whole incident where the narrator beats up the white girl because the white girl has spoken negatively to her about something, for Dadu, this is different. This is unheard of, because if Dadu were to trace her historical roots, then a black person was not expected to beat up a white person. And so this in itself becomes a challenge for Dadu to digest. Now, the narrator sees herself as being a white person's equal because of the whole idea of where she now lives, in the urban areas in New York, where there is no segregation as such. But for Dadu, history would not allow her to accept herself or accept someone as a black person as being a white person's equal. In any case, What we can understand is the racial hierarchy that existed with colonialism and slavery, where at one point Dadu would have experienced the whole idea of white people being superior to black people. No, this may not have been stated explicitly in the story, but what we do understand is that history would have shaped the way that Dadu thinks at this point. No, we can also assume too that the narrator does not is not a reflection then of what Dadu believed in based on her past. For the narrator, she is the new world. She is the changes that have occurred over time. Similarly, the narrator has embraced technology. Of course, Dadu would not have experienced such high level of technology, and therefore she could not embrace such technology. You see, the whole idea of being older and being younger, the generational gap, would have made it also difficult for Dadu to understand and appreciate the things that are happening in the modern world. Dadu does not believe that technology has benefits, because for her, having lived without technology for most of her life, if not all of her life, she could not understand the changes that technology brings and the benefits that one could have from it. This is important, and it is symbolic in many ways, because one may realize and one may recognize and one may accept that Dadu is using the advance in technology to further emphasize the distance that exists between Dadu and the narrator. Their beliefs, the world in which they live, technology itself is going to, for Paule Marshall, this would have been the symbol to suggest that Dadu cannot accept technology, even though it is a part of the narrator's life. And so she, therefore, cannot accept the differences between the urban and the rural world. But what we do understand is that despite the differences between Dadu's world and the narrator's world, we realize that they do enjoy each other's company. Now, that would have brought about the theme and the whole idea of love, that despite the differences in a person's belief, a person's practice, between their cultural differences, there is that bond of family that surfaces to create the kind of love that existed between Dadu and the narrator. Towards the end of the story, what is interesting is that the reader sees that Dadu has died and the narrator has grown up. She has become more mature mentally, and as such, she does not forget the time that she has spent with Dadu. Something becomes clearer to the narrator when she steps back. She isolates herself in her apartment, yes, and she lives through those regrets that she has. She regrets the fact that the machines downstairs disturb her while she is painting, and to some extent we will understand that she realizes the problems that Dadu saw with technology changing her world and changing the way she lived. Now, in many ways, it is as though the narrator longs for the simple life that Dadu had. At that point when she was a child, she would not have understood why Dadu was the way she was. But now that she has grown and she is a woman, she now understands at the end of the story, she understands why Dadu loved her simple rural life. Now, this may have been, in many ways, the point that Marshall was attempting to make. And of course, we may also want to accept that when a person is young, they cannot see the world as an adult. So when the narrator was young, she met Dadu, and therefore she did not truly understand the experiences or the benefits of having a one-on-one conversation as such. She would not have understood the ideas of her elders. Now, when the narrator first met Dadu, her questions were similar to the challenges of the narrator. Instead of understanding or appreciating the life that Dadu had lived in Barbados, that simple rural life, the narrator rose again as a child when she was younger to defend the world in which she was really living, that fast-paced world of the urban world. She would have defended that because guess what? This is the life that she has known, and this is a life that she would have wanted to live. And so the narrator defended all of that, but that was lost in time in many ways because of the differences, the opposites of their world. Now, as an adult, she is able to appreciate Dadu. She's able to appreciate the rural life. She is able to appreciate the simple things. And she is also able to recognize that technology does have its place in the society, but at the same time, it can cause damage to whatever you are doing. So this reality that she learns as an adult is that for her, and for Dadu. They were not very different in many ways, but they were from different worlds. And because of their strength as women, because of their pride, because of their self-confidence, at the point when she met with Dadu, she was not able to appreciate the past. History itself, she could not have appreciated that.